page 372. And the book ends when, bro? When does this fucking book end? Wow, it ends like all the way over here. So, I'm at 372. And the book ends. Here's acknowledgements. The book ends at 632, so we're getting there. 372 to 632. 370 to 630. So we need 60. 260 pages left. Dewey's commitment to intelligence as a form of power. Both were opinionated, although by contrast with Dewey's ponderously functional prose, Mills was laced with invective and value-laden categories. Hans Goethe and Emergy from the Frankfurt School helped move Mills from philosophy to sociology and introduce him to the work of Max Weber. From Weber, Mills then derived his basic explanatory framework, the interweaving of class, status, power, and culture. And the alarm at the role of large bureaucracies in all areas of life. Marx was not read or taken seriously by Mills until well into his career, after which Mills became progressively more Marxist. He was also becoming more of an activist intellectual toward the end of his life, defending the Cuban Revolution, developing links with the British New Left, composed of Marxists, often scholarly, who had left the Communist Party. Part of his appeal to students was that he already identified them as potential agents of change, ready to challenge the forces of inertia and conservatism. His books combine subtle analysis and research with a searing social critique. The critique became more strident during the course of the 1950s as his own international reputation as a dissenting intellectual grew. He was preoccupied with the structures of power. How in modern corporate America, the elite no longer needed brute force or cohesion to sustain its position, but could instead rely on manipulation. His target was what came to be described as the pluralist school, which argued that democracy could function with a relatively low level of citizen participation. Since everybody got something out of the political process and had no cause for either excessive distress or joy, somehow it was working effectively and fairly. The debate on power was an important one. In Mills' book, The Power Elite was always cited on one side of the argument, often against Robert Dahl's Who Governs Democracy and Power in an American City. Part of the difficulty was that they reflected two different views of power and how to measure it, and both views were relevant to the developing debates about radical politics. Power was, and still is, regularly referred to as an attribute of political entity, measured in terms of the more blatant indicators of military and economic strength. Yet it was evident that an ample stock of both did not guarantee favorable outcomes in all encounters. The powerful did not always get their way. Resources needed to be considered in the context of the problems they were supposed to solve. A card player might have great skill and a wonderful hand of cards for bridge, but not for poker. There was therefore a difference between punitive and actual power, between capabilities and effects, the potential and the act. Dahl's definition stressed the ability to influence. A has power over B to the extent that A has power over B to the extent that he can get B to do something that B would not otherwise do. It was not enough that A had capacity. It was only really power as ruled in quite specific relationships through measurable effects by B being made subject to A's will. One of the most important lasting challenges to this view came not from Mills but two political scientists, Peter Bachrach and Morton Baratz, in a 1962 article. Of course, power is exercised when A participates in the making of decisions that affect B, but power is also exercised when A devotes his energies to creating or reinforcing social and political values and institutional practices that limit the scope of the political process to public consideration of only those issues which are comparatively innocuous to A. To the extent that A succeeds in doing this, B is prevented for all practical purposes from bringing to the fore any issues that might, in the resolution, be seriously detrimental to A's set of preferences. This second phase of power had an almost insidious quality. It was about how a sustaining position in a power structure held power over others by keeping issues off the agenda and creating a background consensus that denied B the opportunity to begin to challenge A. Never mind defeat A in a direct confrontation. It was this line of critique that by the end of the decade had been embraced by the radicals, although often in a far cruder false consciousness way than these authors intended. Those avoided the simple Marxist analysis of government being the executive committee of the ruling class, or of mass consciousness being shaped by a Borges ideology. His description of the power elite was more about a bureaucratic convergence of interests, including corporate executives and the warlords, than an organized conspiracy, but he insisted that the system of checks and balances was no longer working, and so encouraged the view of a vital resource being monopolized by a privileged view so that they could get what they wanted when they wanted it. Mills became as much of a pamphleteer as a scholar, prepared to step forth and brazenly pin his indictment like a target to the enemy's chest. His catchy rhetoric remained nonetheless an extension of his sociology. His impatience with mainstream sociology was reflected in his book, The Sociological Imagination, in which he derived what he saw to be the two false paths of mainstream sociology: self-important grand theory on one hand and abstracted empiricism full of microscopic studies that remain marginal to the big questions of the day on the other. The true purpose he insisted should be to connect private troubles with social and political structures. If an individual was unemployed, that was a private trouble. If 20% of the population was unemployed, that was a structural issue, and thus a task